very short in Swedish, Mrs. Ambassador. Varmt välkomna till det här seminariet. Jag heter Thomas Idegard, representerar Newman-institutet som är en högskola för teologi, filosofi och kultur i Uppsala, grundad av jesuiterna i Sverige. Jag är själv också jesuit. Och det här seminariet arrangeras av då Newman-institutet och den katolska kulturtidskriften Signum. Och vi ska prata om integration och förutsättningarna för denna. Och med det så önskar jag välkomna och lämnar över ordet till vår moderator, Katrin Marsall.
Switch over to English. Thank you very much, Thomas. This is a very interesting seminar with an eminent panel. And the title is Integration, a Matter of Jobs or of Values. Because in Sweden, traditionally, the debate around integrating people that come to our country has been about getting people out on the labour market, economic opportunity, economic equality. But in the last couple of years, this other issue about values, do we need to have a debate about what values we have in common in a society, and does that need to be a bigger part of our policies in this area? And I want to introduce Ambassador from Canada. We have Minister for Employment, Ylva Johansson, Sara Skyttedal, Deputy Mayor of Linköping, Maria Borelius, who's an entrepreneur and journalist and runs a microfinance project for immigrant women in Sweden called Esther, and Ursula Berge, who's a political director for the trade union for academics within social sciences. I will start with Ambassador Grant. So Canada was the first country to officially adopt multiculturalism as a policy. What has your experience been?
Well, Canada adopted a policy of multiculturalism back in the 1970s, and that policy was enshrined into law in the 1980s and bolstered by enshrinement in our Charter of Human Rights and also in the Canadian Human Rights Act. Now, a policy doesn't evolve or become law or fact for any reason. For us, it's been actually how we've evolved over the centuries in terms of immigration. And back when Canada was not even a country, Canada was inhabited by our Indigenous peoples. And over the years, we've had successive waves of immigrants come to Canada. And just to give you a sense, in the 17th century, the French, the English, and the Irish came. Between 1867 and the 1940s, Europeans and those of African American descent. 1940s, refugees and displaced persons from Europe. And then in the 1960s, when we actually withdrew our country of origin requirement, we ended up having significant immigration from Africa, from Asia, Latin America, and also the Caribbean. And to give you a sense of the magnitude of that, back in the 1870s, our population was 3.6 million people. And now we've grown to about 36 million. And in that figure, we have captured about 17 million immigrants who've come to Canada in the 150 period. So just to point out that what that means is over the years there's been significant compromise and accommodation because of all this influx of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds of the immigrants who have come. Now, turning a bit to the policy itself, multicultural policy actually ensures that all Canadians are considered equal, regardless of their ethnic origin, their race, their religious affiliation, or their language. And what we try to do is actually promote individuals and newcomers having pride in their backgrounds, in their ancestry. We see that as fundamental, actually, to creating a very diverse, rich, and inclusive society. And I would say that studies have shown that is in fact the case. When you promote diversity, when you promote inclusion, you create a much more productive, innovative society. In the workplace, there's greater social cohesion. So for us, multiculturalism, it has been a very positive experience for us. Diversity is a fact. What we say is that diversity is in fact our strength. We are strong because of our diversity, not in spite of it. What we do see is that inclusion is actually the choice that we make. I'll leave it.
So, Ylva Johansson, many politicians are looking to Canada and the Canadian immigration system. Are you one of them?
Yes, yes, I am, of course, and I visited Canada 2 years ago just to study how the integration process is going, and I also have close connections with my colleague in Canada. So, of course, we have a lot to learn from Canada and also from other countries. I think that one of those things that was striking me when I went to Canada was how the active policy of integration, and so many people on a voluntary basis in NGOs, but also employers, enterprises that have an active policy of working with integration. And when I come to Sweden, I can see that we almost have the same amount of people working with integration, but many of them just find themselves in there. they just happen to be working with integration, because this is actually the fact. In our small town, newcomers come here, they actually come to our school, they came to our sports club, whatever, and yes, I start to work with this. So I think that we can learn something of the more systematic approach of integration involving the civic society.
And how would that, do you think that could be done?
Well, together with the civic society, of course, but I think one is that, well, to put it like this, when I started to have this responsibility in government, and I tried to learn how do we welcome new people to Sweden, how do we integrate them in the labor market specifically, because of course that's my interest. And I was a bit surprised, because you know, when I go to international meetings and so on, I often hear myself saying, in Sweden we have a system, because we usually have. But when it comes to integrating newcomers into the labor market, there is so much of individuals, the special project, special occasions, you know, this kind of not systematic. So I think this is what we have to learn, is that we have to have a systematic approach. And that means also that I think that the state has to take one step forward, not to do everything, but to take one step forward in a situation where we have such huge challenges, because we are right now into a huge challenge of integrating all these people that came in 2015. And we have to do two things at the same time, both handling the acute situation or the present situation, but also to build better systems for the future. And one of those is, of course, to recognize the skills that people have with them, because that's also what they do much better in Canada than we do, to start with the skills that people are bringing and then add the extra that's needed to get into the right job.
Maria Bredes, you work on a very practical level with people's skills and using them.
The question you asked in the beginning, what is most important, values or jobs? I think that's it's the wrong question, because they actually go together very much, and we see that on a practical term. So having values that work in the new society where you are, that is intrinsically linked to your ability to be able to create an income for your family. You have to, for instance, have the value that you have to be at your work in time. That's a value. Or that a man is equal to a woman, because that's how you work in Swedish society. On the other hand, if you don't have a job, it's very hard to integrate on the more fundamental value-based level. So they are intrinsically linked, these two things, and we see as an NGO working with newcoming women that we have to work with both. So we're actually stepping up our values-based work with these women, and especially when it comes to how it's sort of the rights of a woman compared to a man, because we are seeing that a lot of these women who are coming are in situations that are not functioning for them if they want to go out and become economically active. So these values work together in a very strong way, and the more you enforce the job side, the more you enforce the value side, and actually the other way around.
Ursula Berge, do you agree?
I agree on the fact that values and jobs are really the same thing. It's two sides of the same issue. But I would say you have to discuss values in two different ways. One is people come here, but it's also about who we are and what we are like employers, like colleagues, and what we are like neighbors. And I think the integration debate in Sweden is a little bit too much about people come here and how they have to adapt to the Swedish system. I think we, who have been living here in Sweden or born here in Sweden, has to change our values too. When we employ people, that we try to not employ people who look like ourselves all the time, that we really try to see other experiences, other educations as good as our own. And so this is something very important for the Swedish society to manage too, not to only that values has to be adopted and changed for people who come here, but also within ourselves.
Ambassador Grant, you were nodding. Do you agree? Do you have this experience in Canada?
Actually, I was going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And that was actually, I first want to make it very clear that we don't compare our situation in terms of our immigration flows to, for example, what happened in 2015 here in Sweden in terms of significant number of asylum seekers who came. In Canada, we have very much a managed immigration system, and that was the point that I wanted to emphasize. First off, we need immigrants. It's the only way we can sustain our economy. That's just a fundamental principle. It's accepted by Canadians. And again, overwhelming number of Canadians are really supportive of a very diverse and inclusive culture. But I just want to get onto the immigration system in Canada, because it is, I think, as the minister was saying, you know, there's a different approach that we take in terms of the integration of newcomers. And in 2017, we are targeting 300,000 immigrants to come to Canada. We welcome them. And there's three different classes. There's economic, which are, you know, primarily skilled workers, also family members, that's family reunification, and then refugees. And what I'd like to say is that in Canada, we focus on a two-way adaptation model. That is our immigration approach. So we are looking at it from both sides, adapting. So what we basically do is those 300,000 that we are targeting to come to Canada, at the end of the day, we are guaranteeing them permanent residency status. They're not there temporarily. We welcome them. We want them to stay. And so we have all kinds of programs even before they arrive to find out what their skills are, what their interests are. Do they have any friends or relatives in Canada, for example? This is in the context of refugees, and to try, you know, to help them with their resettlement. And then all kinds of programs as well through service delivery. Service deliverers, you know, who try to help with the integration process. But I think for me, one of the unique qualities about how we approach our refugee system, there's two types of refugees. There's ones that are government sponsored, what we would call the quota refugees, or at least in Sweden, I understand that's how you refer to them. But we have privately sponsored refugees, and this is something I have to admit I'm pretty proud of. Privately sponsored actually means that civil society steps up to cover the costs of housing, clothing, food, necessities for selected refugees for the first year. So it's not the government that supports that. They still have access to all the services the government provides, but it's a very hands-on approach by members of civil society. And the program came about in the 1970s when the Vietnamese boat people were fleeing and looking for refuge. And basically, Canadians were not satisfied with the number of refugees that the government said it was feasible for them to support. And so they stepped up. And over the years, we ended up resettling about 100,000 Vietnamese boat people in Canada. So that's I have to say, this group of refugees actually, they tend to integrate much better than those that are government sponsored, and probably in large member because of the personal interaction and the support that they get from the individuals or the organization or congregation, for example, that stepped up to support them. And they also have much more success getting into the labor market.
So Ambassador Grant is saying that in essence it's hard comparing the Canadian experience in some ways with the European, and in Europe there's been a significant backlash against the idea of multiculturalism in recent years. It's been declared dead by politicians like David Cameron and Angela Merkel. Do you think multiculturalism is still an ideal to champion in Europe?
No, I would not say so. I think, of course, the migration system that we have, the way the ambassador is pointing out, is making it is influencing the way that we can work with integration as well. And I think you need to point that out in the beginning. But I think, although it's obvious that our societies are failing in the challenge of providing jobs for people, we are also failing in the more cultural integration part. And I think that we have a huge challenge because one thing that has made, I think most people agree, Swedish society that's successful is the high levels of trust between individuals and for governments and our system. And in almost segregated areas in Sweden, this is massively failing, and for a good reason, because the police system say they cannot control the situation in these areas to a full extent, and in that way you cannot really trust society. But I think this is also really failing in a more basic level. I grew up in one of these areas, and I think it became even worse since I moved from there, because one of my friends recently moved to one of these areas, moved into a high tall building, and he decided to do something quite Swedish, to go around to his neighbors and to introduce himself. So he knocked on every door in the building, and he thought this was a nice idea to create connections. But unfortunately, not a single person opened their doors in this whole building.
Because of the lack of trust?
Because of I think so. I mean, some of them were at home, and he heard noises from the inside. But I think it really is pretty clear how low the levels of trust is in a society where you don't even open the door for your neighbor, even though they're, doesn't have a weapon in their hands or whatever. He is a police officer, but they couldn't know, he wasn't in the uniform. But still, it's I think it's very important, and I think Sweden hasn't really came very far in the debates about values, and I agree very much with the things that Maria said, because I think these two go hand in hand. The way to understand society and our values is, of course, to be integrated, to have a job in a way, but still, I think a good example in Europe right now is Bavaria, the only other country in Europe that I actually lived in, but where you have both successes in jobs creation. They had a goal of giving 20,000 of the refugees either apprenticeship or a job or what do you call it? Anyway, these things, and they succeeded with 60,000. So they had 3 times as many as their goal, which is way more than our government is reaching their goal. Sorry. And but I also have this discussion about leitkultur, which is something quite interesting. It means the core culture. So you understand that there are some cultural elements in society that are not that important, of course, that are just interesting differences that can be part of the same society. But you have some core of values that you need to respect and be a part of to really contribute as a member of that society. And I think we need to discuss what are these values, because there is a Swedish system. And I think that you realize that as soon as you step out of Swedish society, then you realize that some things are less organized or structured. And in this way you need to find and to realize that there are something that you need to be part of to be able to create common ground that makes it easy to trust each other and society.
So that would be a step away from the ideal of multiculturalism. Ylva Johansson, as a government minister, how do you think about this importance of values that Maria and Sarah have stressed in your work?
I think that values is very, very important, and I do very much agree that values are not, floating around like a ghost. It's based in something. It's based in the things you do and the relations you have and all that. So that's why you can't separate them from all the work that's done for having a job, for having your financing yourself, being part of society, being part of NGOs and civil society, being part of your children's school and all that. So that's where values are born, you can say, in this reality. But I think that we haven't discussed this so much. And just to make it, one thing I think is a little bit problematic, because when we compare to some other countries that we usually say is maybe better than we are on integration, many of them, like Britain, like Canada, have more of communities. Like for example, the private sponsored refugees, they are usually coming from the same ethnic group, yeah, and they are being introduced to society by their ethnic group. So the communities are stronger than in Sweden. And in Sweden we usually say that this is a problem, it's segregation. If people from the same ethnic background live in the same area, just talk to each other, work in each other's companies, go to the same school, this is also part of the problem in a Swedish perspective. And that may be one of the Swedish value, that if we think that it's really good that we can integrate with each other. And I think also we have to realize that Sweden is a bit extreme when it comes to values. Of this value service, we are very high up in the very end. So it's not so easy for people ending up here and finding out that this country has extreme values in some...
Very extreme in terms of individualism and secularism.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, but maybe that's why we are a little bit hesitating for the community path, because we think that it's important to be more integrated. And I think also that there are some problems with the community part. And if I may give one example, I had a connection that was meeting with women from Somalia in Husby, which is a segregated area outside Stockholm. And we were talking about a lot of things with these women. And one day one woman said to me, Ylva, there's something funny with this. I grew up in Uppsala, which is a more town outside Stockholm. I grew up in Uppsala. When I lived in Uppsala, I was a lawyer. And when I moved to Husby, I became a Somalian woman. And I think that's true also, that this discrimination and how we think about people is also flavored by where we live. So if you're part of that community, and I think when it comes to labor market, I think you have the right to be a lawyer, and your ethnic background and how you identify yourself, can identify however you want, but in the labor market, it's your skills that counts. I think that's important. I think that's also important Swedish norms for the labor market.
Maria, you wanted to comment?
I think this discussion about values is very, very important, because one of the reasons that so many people want to come to Europe, and I'm thinking about Canada in a way as a sort of extension of the Western world, is of course has its basis in a set of values that were formulated a very long time ago and then have expanded into national differences. We're talking about the basis from Rome, Athens and Jerusalem, the respect for democracy, the respect for the legal system and the universal human rights. This is not to say that this doesn't exist in other parts of the world, but this is our culture. And we're proud of it. We're proud of the institutions that has created. And I think one of the problems that Sweden is having, I live together with Katrin, we both live in the UK, is that there is very little discussion in Sweden, or has been so far, about values and what we stand for and where we come from, our own history. And I think to be able to be open to other people and to be open in terms of values, you have to know who you are yourself. Because if you're wobbly in what you are yourself, it's very hard to know where do I end and you begin, and that's sort of the beginning of the discussion. So I want to say and that's not to say that you're rigid and that's the best, but that's us. That's who we are. And I think also when you meet newcomers, you have to understand that they are not one group. And I instinctively shy back, because we work hard as hell. There is an enormous difference between a Syrian woman who has been managing a confectionery fabric in China and doing very sexy underwear for Arab women. Yes, it exists. And a Ghanaian woman who was born in the Ashanti tribe and then worked in the stalls down in Accra, or an Eritrean woman, or from Kazakhstan or Vietnam. They come with their own values too, and they are not the same between the women that we work with. They are very, very different. So it's not that they are one group and we are one group. They are a multitude of values and ideas and conceptions, and you have to talk to each one of those. And they are very different in terms of how they see the new society and what they want to do with their lives in it. So all of these things will require, and I think Canada has done a lot of sort of legwork in terms of this, and we have to start out on this journey. Who are we? And also understand that they are many and also different and individuals.
So, Ursula Berge, you were mentioning that Sweden needs to change too, and Ylva Johansson was saying that we're extreme when it comes to values, secularism and individualism. Are those examples that we think need to change?
I think secularism and individualism is values that are a part of core values in Sweden and in other parts. But I think it's very important to understand that our values changes with the people who live here. And like 100 years ago, women didn't have the right to vote in Sweden. So it's not that long ago that we didn't really see people as equal, not women and men. And a little bit further away in history, rich men were the only ones who had the right to vote. So we changed too. It's not something rigid that never changes. It changes with the people who live here. But we have some core values that are very important to stress, and that's mainly the universal human rights, the humanitarian aspects. I think is a very central core value when we discuss migration, because humanitarian aspect has been the core value of our view on asylum politics, that people have the right to come here and seek asylum, and if they have the right to asylum, they should get it. And not only this utility perspective, that do we need them, do we need their skills? I think that's a positive by effect of the people who come here. But the core value in Sweden is the humanitarian, universal aspect that all men and women are created equal.
Ylva Johansson.
I think what Mrs. Ambassador was said, everybody should be proud of their background. And I think this is also true for Swedish. So I think what Ursula is saying that some of the part where we are extreme is because we've been fighting hard for it, for women's gender equality, for example, and for individualism and so on. So this is not something that we just was born with. It was something that we fight for. Of course, we are proud of that. I think this is important. But I think Ursula said something important earlier, that we also have to change not only values, but also how we see ourselves, how we reckon ourselves. Because we need to change the way we look upon ourselves, we that are born in Sweden. And let me make one example. Language. If you come to Canada, most people are familiar with that English Canadian sounds very, very different. Yeah, but it's still you're still speaking the same language. But when you come to Sweden, we are used that Swedish language also have to sound Swedish. And what is really that? It can be many kind of dialects, but if you can hear that you were born with another mother tongue, maybe you do not really sound Swedish. So I think that's one example. We have to be get used to that the Swedish language can sound in different ways, like other big languages has to be used to. And I think that's one of the changes that we have to do also in Sweden, and we have to change how we view ourselves.
Yes, the bruten svenska, the expression, there's no equivalent to that in English. There's nothing that means the same thing. It's very, very Swedish. Sorry, Skyttedal, we're talking about Swedish values being quite extreme when it comes to, for example, secularism. One could argue, I suppose, that it's difficult for us to meet other religions and people that come from other religions because there's not much emphasis on religion in Sweden because we are such a secular country. Do you agree with that?
I think in a way, but I think part of I think the discussion we should have is actually I think the German Social Democrats did something well when they said that they need to find some they call it like the new core culture. What kind of culture we want to be, and know that culture of course is of course evolving. It always is, but we have some core there that we need to protect, and I think that Sweden should be a better society if we were challenged in our extreme individualism, for instance, and to take part in more of to have a stronger civil society and to see that we have communities that are important as well. So I think in a way it's good to be challenged, but you need to realize which are values that we need to protect and to strengthen that core. Another thing that I think is a bit problematic when we talk about Swedish identity is that most of us think that the important stuff is the stuff that is probably the most hardest to grasp, these invisible structures that form our behavior in labor market or in when you hang out with other people in your social life. But as we really try to remove, we think we have had a tradition in Sweden to really remove all of these signals of Swedish society, and we have these annual debates about like having church, school, when you at the end of the school year have the end of the school year in the church, and all these things. And sometimes we are so, and we try to remove all of these visible signs of Swedish identity. And I think this is something bad for integration. And I come back to Bavaria once again, which is where you have a culture where it's very easy to visibly show that you want to take a part of it by wearing lederhosen or dirndl, or to drink a beer in the beer hall, and you have very visible cultural aspects. And these can be called banal in the bigger picture because values are the important part. But I think it's a problem where you make it very hard for people to signal that they want to take part in society. We have a very few things in Swedish society where you can really show that we want to take part in the same community, and I think we should protect these because it makes it easier for someone to show that they want to step in and take part. And I think it's very inclusive to protect also these, even though it's a bit on another level.
Ambassador Grant, but in Canada, hockey games are broadcast in English, French, and Punjabi, right? But Canadians seem very proud of their multiculturalism, and in surveys, etc., people seem to think this is a part of what Canada is. Am I right?
Absolutely. I just want to go back to what the minister was saying about language, because I'm from Ottawa, and in Ottawa everyone thinks we're nice. That is how we're described. Canadians are nice. And I started to question that about myself. Was I really nice? And the reason was because, as I grew up in Ottawa, and a lot of tourists would come, people would stand there with maps and, be looking around, and I didn't go and offer my assistance. And I started to question how nice I was. And I wondered why I didn't do that. And part of what I came to as an answer was, in fact, that I actually saw them as new Canadians. And they were, to be frank, it was part of learning and enjoying, walking around, discovering, their new place. And when I hear people who speak different languages, or I hear people speak English with different accents, I don't think of them as tourists. I think of them as Canadians. It's as simple as that, but it took me a long time to understand and to reflect on my own behavior and my own attitudes. diversity, what can I say? I think it's wonderful. We take pride in the mosaic that's Canada. We are not a melting pot. We don't want a melting pot. I had a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day, in fact, about this panel. And it was about the word assimilation. And it's not a term that I think about. It's not a term that even enters my mind when I talk about integration and inclusion in Canada. Assimilation is a one-way street. It's asking people to adjust. And my colleague's reaction, he said, assimilate to what? You know, we're all unique. We're all individual. We don't have a Canadian value system. Universal human rights, absolutely. We have core individual rights that are protected under the law.
But you still have a citizenship test, don't you?
Knowledge.
Knowledge.
Yes. Knowledge, yes. And just so we're clear, we promote citizenship. And one statistic that has stuck with me is that 88% of refugees who come to Canada have chosen citizenship. And that makes me proud. We want, I mean, as I told you, when we have immigrants come to Canada, it's with a view, we want them to stay, they get permanent residency status. That's what we offer them. We also, though, I mean, we teach them, we make sure that they understand what our laws are, part of that civic responsibility training, but in turn, we ask them to be proud of who they are and to bring their cultural differences, the wonderful elements of their cultures into our society too, which enriches us.
Ursula Berge, you wanted to comment, then Maria.
Yes, it's so wonderful to hear the descriptions of Canada, because just saying that diversity is wonderful. It's such a nice view on how society evolves and how society all the time moves forward. What I would like, if we really want a value-based discussion here in Sweden, I would like to have a discussion about what's the difference in our view of the word and the essence of integration compared to assimilation, as you say, because I think the debate today in Sweden is, we are so afraid of the debate today that integration tends to be the same as assimilation, and that's not really the case. It's something completely different, and assimilation is like the perspective that the society who takes that people come to doesn't change at all. But what is integration? And I think that's very important for all of us to try to answer.
Maria, you wanted to come in?
Yeah. Well, just to sort of bring this down to the concrete level, we just also have to understand that in many ways, Sweden is a very impenetrable society for people coming from abroad. And in the workplace, one of the things I'm hearing most from the women we work with is that you never understand what you have to do in a workplace in Sweden, because the rules are so soft. And the leadership is like a floating cloud somewhere. and in the coffee room, people are talking insect sounds, and nothing is ever clear. It's like, yeah, this kind of sound. So we have, we have to think about that, because many of them come from cultures where you are given a manual, you are told exactly how you want to do it, and we have a managerial style that is more about bringing forth the individual, about teams taking responsibility. So that's one of the practical things we have to think about, which is not entirely simple, because I think most people in Sweden actually value this way of working, but how can you still make the job clear to people who are new in the culture and who don't have the cultural codes on how you have to do something? So I just want to make it slightly more problematic. I think Sweden has a lot of work to do going forward to make proper or harmonious, I would call it, integration, not assimilation, but harmonious integration forward. And one of the is the workplace.
Ylva Johansson, is this something you recognise from your work as a government minister?
Yes, very, very much. And I think that we don't realize how odd our workplaces are compared to many other countries. For example, is that we expect everybody on each level to take their own initiatives all the time. If there is something happening, you have to solve it. And in many other countries, there's a totally different culture and totally different norms. And when we talk to people who have been integrated in the Swedish labor market, they usually talk about fika as one of the most difficult things to learn the importance of, and also that's very odd. And I think what we have to take, well, that's of course important for me, because how we work with integrating people to workplaces, it's very important that you can be at a workplace to learn these norms and this how we do things. It's not possible, I think, to learn as outside the workplace. You have to be there to understand, and that's why it's so important for employers to open up their businesses or their workplaces for people to come and practice, and also for unions, for example, that have this mentorship, learning how we do things in our profession and the ordinary things in the working life. But I also think that it's important that we do not mess up with norms and values, because fika is a very important norm in a Swedish workplace, but it's not a value.
You sure?
Yes. So I think we need, because some things are, I mean, of course we have to also to make a real opportunity for newcomers to learn about the norms that we have in our workplace, for example, or in society. But then it also comes to values. For example, the importance of the same value for men and women, and the same opportunities for men and women also at the workplace. That's a value. That's not also, it could be norms, of course, but it's also a value. So that's a little bit different how we deal with norms and how we deal with values. And we have to understand that our norms are a bit odd.
So a test for citizenship that includes values, for example, or knowledge about Sweden, would that be something to look at, Ylva Johansson?
Well, I think we need to do much more to give the opportunity for people to learn about Swedish values, Swedish norms, and knowledge about our society. But I'm not interested in setting up new obstacles for people to get the citizenship, because, as you said, I'm always very proud when a person would like to be a Swedish citizen, and this wonderful ceremony on the National Day when they got it and so on. So I'm not interested in make it more complicated to have the citizenship, but I do think that we need to do more and to understand that it's not something that you are born with. You have to learn, and we are a bit odd when it comes to norm and also when it comes to values, and we have to give newcomers real opportunities to learn how we do things in our workplace or in society.
So, Skyttedal, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I think
Take a whole mic. Skip it.
Yeah, I think I don't view a citizenship test as an obstacle, but I think if you make it right, you can use it as a tool. I think for the most important reason is that, as most of us have cleared out here, is that we expect people to take very much responsibility in Swedish society, and I think if we have a test that is clear on, maybe not on values, because it's pretty hard to have a test on that, but to have some common knowledge on how the Swedish society is working, I think it sends out a very clear signal how you are supposed to become a Swede. And it's very clear. And I think right now we're making it more difficult because we don't make it clear for people what you really expect from them. So I think I would rather see it as a tool. But I mean, of course, it's not going to solve everything just because we have a test before we become a citizen. It's always a very complex issue. And I think also to comment a bit on the language situation where we have, I would even go to that extent to describe it as if you don't pronounce every Swedish word perfectly, you don't only view that person as a non-Swede, but you think that their cognitive ability is less, and that is really damaging the way people can compete on the labor market. it. And I don't think that we should, change the Swedish language and its structure, but its pronunciation is something that is, of course, but Sweden is a very small country and our language is quite limited. So it's only natural that we have this. I think it's the same in other countries that have a smaller language base. So it's not odd, but of course it's an obstacle that makes it really, really hard for someone to join.
So, I mean, diversity is a wonderful thing, but there's also lots of sort of very concrete examples when sort of it challenges society. I'm talking about sort of controversies around prayer in school, sex education, girls not participating in, or parents not wanting their girls to participate in swimming, for example. How should a society deal with these conflicts, Maria?
So I think absolutely the best way to do it is to work with women, and I have found that very often the immigrant women are forgotten. A lot of things is done for young people, and sort of the men seem to kind of grab their opportunities. But the women are the entry gate. You say when you lift a man, you lift him. When you lift a woman, you lift a community. And if you have women that are on the verge of integration, we are seeing that in our microfinance schemes. We had one woman who was a slave when she came to us. Slaves exist in Sweden. You are locked up, maybe by your family, and you are working for free. And she has now bought her own home, even her own house, to her family. And that has totally changed what she's doing with her kids. Her kids have better grades in schools. They are now going to the gymnastics. They are reaching out to the community around them. They are being a huge inspiration. And this is a family that didn't even exist on the records in Sweden. They were kind of a non-family before. So things can happen a lot, and that was through the woman. She is the change agent in these families, and she's very forgotten. And we have to dig out our women against practically all authorities who are hiding them from us, because it's so problematic. I know they never want to come, they never want to do anything, they don't speak Swedish, we hide them away. The women are the key.
Things like, say, I don't want my daughter to participate in sex education in school. How do we deal with that, Ylva Johansson?
I think this is one of the things that we should be proud of being Swedish, that we've been fighting for this. It wasn't natural with sex education in school for everybody. We've been fighting for that, and we have to stand up for this. And this is about, I think, one of the core values that we've been fighting for the right for the individual. It's not your family who decides what you're going to learn in school, or what we're going to teach you in school. It's an individual right, and we have a democratic system to set up what is a part of that curriculum. And that is part of what we have been fighting for in Sweden, and I think that we should be proud of, and that we should stand up for. So, and this is one of the odd things, of course, with a very strong emphasis on the individuals and not on the family. Actually, we think that the family do not have the right to decide about you, not even about the children, not about your wife. You have your individual right. And we have also to realize that this is also one of the most important values that why people choose to flee to Sweden. Because of the strong right for the individual, and of course of the strong democratic values that we have. So I think it's important that we stand up for that.
But how should we decide what is core values and not? Because on one hand you're all saying Sweden needs to change as well. Who should decide what the core values are, Ursula?
Well, I totally agree with the Minister Ylva here. We have some core values, for example, sex education in school. That's based in the universal human rights and the idea that men and women, girls and boys are equal. And I think that's a very important core value to send. But another value was like 20 years ago when a person who were Sikh, what's it called in English? He couldn't, if he wear this traditional clothes and turban, he couldn't drive a bus in in Stockholm. That's not a core value. It's not a core value what kind of hat you have. So we have to be rather sober, if you can call it that, in our views. It's very possible to look different if you drive buses, But it's a core value that girls and boys are equal in the Swedish society. And if we look at the issues in a very not that dramatic way, I think we can solve these problems in a very sober way, so to speak.
So, Sarah Skyttedal, you wanted to come in, and then we're going to do one final round in the panel.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think this question is really pointing out what many of the problems that we get to in Sweden because of our extreme secularism, and I think that we need to, set out, where the limits are for our, expansion on our secularism, because I think that we need to, of course, ensure that we have the same curriculum in the schools, for instance, for everyone, which is, I think, common ground. But I think we're making a mistake when we're, for instance, having a crusade against the religious free schools in Sweden, when you don't allow outside of the lessons, outside of the curriculum, to have prayer. And I don't think it matters if it's Christian or if it's Muslim prayer. I think it's a society that protects people wearing the religious symbols, but not allowing them to perform their rituals is really failing in tolerance.
Yeah, that's an interesting discussion. I live in the UK, where the debate around religious schools is very different, where people actually fake religion to get into the religious schools because they're so good. So it's so it's different. So this final round in the panel, starting with Ylva Johansson, what's the most important thing to take away from this discussion today?
I think that the most important thing is that we are individuals and we are more like each other than we think we are. So we might come from different backgrounds, we might come from different countries, from different religions, or from very different experience, but there are also a very lot that we have in common. And just to give two examples, one of them with a lot of newcomer of unaccompanied minors that came to Sweden, mostly teenage boys, and they sometimes look at something very, very different. I have a teenage boy at home myself. They are not so nice all the time. And for example, we suggested, could you and father go away this weekend, because I'd like to have 10 of my friends here for a party, and we said, no, that's not a good idea. So, I mean, there's some things of young men being together without parents, without grown-ups. It's not really a good idea. We have to interfere with that. Or, for example, when people have their first baby, they're being parents for the first time, we have learned that when we do special projects or special efforts to reach for newcomers, how do you deal with your first baby? How do you deal with the healthcare system, with the vaccines, with everything that's happening? Well, they are like all other new parents, of course. They are very nervous. Do I do the right thing? Will my baby get all right? What have to do? I think we need to realize that we have to meet people and don't think, well, they have another religion or they're coming from another country. They are probably very, very different. They're probably not.
Gone with Ursula, because I know you have to.
Yes, I have another seminar in 5 minutes, so and I can't really move on 0 seconds. I think it's very important to see we are not in the apocalypse right now. It's not the end of time tomorrow. This is something, we are a part of something that has been moving and changing all the time. And I think fear of change is not a very good view of how society change in a good way. I think there's much more possibilities in a society that is open, in a society that welcomes people. It's the open nations that are the wealthy nations. It's the open nations that are the nations that respect individuals, respect the humanitarian universal aspects of how we see on each other. And Canada is a good example of that, and Sweden should still be that.
Well, to sum up, I think to be able to include people in our society, we need to know who we are and what we value in society.
I remember I spent a few years in the board of the youth of the European People's Party, and the first time when I went there, I started to write all these resolutions on how we should change Europe in different ways. And my idea was that everyone in this group, because it's like-minded people are my sister parties in other European countries, that we should think alike about everything. So I expect everyone to be just like me, and I failed massively because they weren't. And I think the way that I made progress to be able to cooperate with other people from this is still Europe, so it's quite similar, was to realize in which ways I was different. I think Minister was very clear, very importantly said that we need to realize that we are quite extreme and to be able to cooperate with other people and to understand what matters to them and to review what in Swedish society do we think is the core and to have a discussion about that. Of course, everything is not. Some things can be adapted and enriched by other cultures, but there are things that I think most of us want to protect, and we need to have more of a debate on what this is.
Thank you. Ambassador Grant.
My Prime Minister says consistently, Canada is strong because of its diversity, not in spite of it. And for us, we're very much focused on the issue of inclusion. And inclusion is a choice. Diversity is a fact. Now, having said that, I want to be honest. We have racism in Canada. We have hate crimes. We discriminate. There's unfair treatment. So I don't want to sugarcoat it and suggest to you that it's perfect in Canada. It isn't. I think the issue is that we can't be complacent. And that's the message that I want to pass. We can't be complacent in terms of the respect that we show for each other, for individuals, people with unique qualities, different backgrounds, and try to find ways to work together, mutually adapt in our society, and actually really take pride in, again, the mosaic that we have in Canada in terms of our population. There was a statistic that was shared by our Governor General when he was here on the state visit back in February. And he said 1/3 of Muslims in Canada have said that they have been discriminated against or treated unfairly in the past 5 years. To be frank, that's unacceptable. We have to change that, and we need to work at it. We are concerned, though, with the growing negative discourse that's out there about immigrants. And that's something that we want to try to counter because we think it distracts from the positive elements that immigration brings to a society, to a country, in the workplace, but also in terms of social cohesion when you welcome them and you allow people to thrive by being different and being unique. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Maria.
So thank you for that image from Canada. I have quite a lot of friends in Canada, and the last time I was flying back from Toronto to London, there was a huge queue of wheelchairs, about 18 or 9. I've never seen so many wheelchairs going on board a plane, and I was thinking, oh, maybe it's been a conference for handicapped people or something. And then it turned out that out of the 18, 17 were Indians, elderly Indian gentlemen, women who were going back London back to India, and it was a sign of courtesy in your family to arrange a wheelchair for your mother or your father, even if they could walk, because that's how you look after your parent. That's the culture. And then there was one man who was severely handicapped, physically handicapped, and he was very upset that the 17 people who were in wheelchairs, because it was a courtesy wheelchair, were there taking his sort of proper attention from the staff. And there was actually quite a lot of quarrel around the Indians who were thinking they were in their culture being polite, and this gentleman who wanted help because he had physical needs. And I was just thinking that even the most well-meaning country can end up with these conflicts. And we have to understand and accept that even Sweden, well-meaning Sweden, will end up with a lot of discussions and problems. And how do you solve that? Well, I think there are only 3 ways. It's curiosity, it's universal humanism, and it's kindness. Normal values between people.
Thank you very much. I think everyone here has showed curiosity and kindness in this panel. It's been a very interesting discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.